So welcome everybody to the first virtual meeting of the Twin Tiers Five Rivers chapter. I'm Kirk Klingensmith and president of the chapter, and I want to welcome you to this live stream. Just as we get started, I have a few slides to share let me see. First of all, the COVID crisis forced us to cancel all our gatherings, and at least until May 15th, and we're awaiting directions from the state, but expecting that the gatherings will cancel for further. So with my board, we've been working together to develop virtual capability for the club. I hope that you've noticed some of that through what we're doing on Facebook, and today is kind of our big trial to do a virtual program through Facebook Live. So welcome to our first meeting. Now, my board of directors is on a Zoom call with me, which we are rebroadcasting onto Facebook Live. And Bob Carlson and Bob Schaeffler, you may want to say hi in your comments there on Facebook. We'll be monitoring Facebook, and as you have comments or questions on Facebook, Bob will reply either to your question or pass those questions along through Zoom. So that's the way we're hoping things will work today. What we've got planned is what we normally do for a meeting, is to start with a fly tying demonstration. I'm going to be doing the presentation and the demonstration and making some announcements along the way. And at the very end, we will have our spring rod raffle drawing at the end of the meeting. And Vince Leonard is on the line, and he is ready to draw the rod raffle tickets. But we have decided to leave the opportunity open. If you want to buy rod raffle tickets, you can do that through PayPal by going onto our website. The link is right here. It is posted a number of places on our Facebook group page, but go on our website. You will see the link to the raffle tickets on the right-hand side, I believe. And we will keep our raffle tickets open as long as we can. We're expecting to need to close those at 7:30. All right, enough for announcements, and let's get going. Okay, well, I'm going to be tying a shimmering minnow. This is one of my favorite bass flies. I use it for largemouth and smallmouth bass, and I also use it for trout. And I've cut steelhead on this fly. This fly was developed by Brian Shumaker. He's a guide in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and he's a good friend. He's been to the club, and the pattern sheet is linked on the comments to start this Facebook Live session. You will see a link to the pattern sheet. So all the materials and how to tie it is all in a PDF file, which you can download and have for yourself. The original color of the shimmering minnow is shown here as Brian first tied it. I can tell you that I have now tied this in many colors, many different, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to tie the one in the upper right-hand corner which is the peacock top white. But when we were thinking about fishing for smallmouth, on the left is a very effective chartreuse in yellow pattern. All yellow, all chartreuse works really well. And the original is on the lower right. So with that, I'm going to see if I can do a little manipulating of the and get over to my fly tying device and show you the Shimmering Minnow. So everything good so far, folks on the Zoom call? All right.
That's good.
This is the Shimmering Minnow. This pattern is an articulated pattern. So it's going to take a little bit of time to get through this. What we're going to do is first tie the back, this swinging back. It does not have a hook. And then we'll tie the front. So to start off, I'm just using a long shank ring shank hook, so the ring eye hook. What you're going to see is we're going to cut the back of this hook off, so it doesn't really matter what the hook is. We're just using it for the front wire. And I'm just going to start by starting the thread right behind the eye, and I'm going to build a thread base, maybe a 1/4 inch long, maybe 3/8. That's it. That's the thread base. And I'm just using this for a lower hinge, or for a hinge. So what I'm going to do is, the first part of this is going to be a marabou tail, and I want that approximately about, let's see, the length of a body and a half of the main fly. So I took some white marabou, I cut it to length. What I'm going to do is just put that down here and bind it down. This will give a nice swimming action. I hope that's clear. Seems a little flooded, but maybe that's okay. Okay. And I may just add a little bit more of the fluffy type marabou. I really like the fluffy type marabou. And I'm just going to build that up just a little bit more. All right, no big deal. There we are. Now, what I'm going to do is down both sides, I'm going to use holographic crystal flash. This is silver. I like the silver for the white fly. And I like fire tiger for the chartreuse and yellow bass colors. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to pick out maybe 4 or 5 strands. You want a fair amount of flash, and I'm going to lay that down both sides. I'm doing the side closest to me. Take a couple wraps. I want the flash just a gnat's ass longer than the marabou. And then I'm going to come down the other side. Then I'm going to cut that just a little longer than the marabou. Make sense? And then the last, one of the things that I like to do is put a fair amount of super glue. And the last thing you want to do is have this tail section slide off. And so I'll put some super glue. I like to do it right before I put the marabou down, but I just forgot. But that'll keep a more durable fly. Okay, now the last part of this section is some pearl Palmer chenille. This is in medium size, as it's covered in those instructions. And what I'm going to do is get that out of the package. This Palmer chenille is a one-sided chenille. Let's show you that. So it only has fibers on one side. And it has a core like a normal chenille does. I'm going to come in there and get the core bound down. Okay. And then I'm going to come over and I'm going to make one wrap and then pull the fibers back. What I'm trying to do is get a tapered flash and what is that? Maybe 4 or 5 turns, maybe 6. You can see there you go. All right, good. All right, and now I'm just going to tie that down and make a little neat head in the back and let finish. All right. Now the back section is, the tying part of it is complete. I'm going to come in with some UV finish. It says Loon, but it's actually Solaris thin that's in the container. But I like the brush applicator. So I'm going to come in and cure that. Okay. And then the last step is this section. You can see the shank of that hook. I'm going to come in. I'm going to avoid all the materials and cut it with my wire cutter. I got a hold of the marabou. If you forget that can launch that tail section across the room. So keep a hold of that tail section when you cut it off and you'll be safe. All right, so now I can get rid of that. The main business hook here is size 4, standard length, standard wire hook. In my case, I'm using a Gamakatsu V10S. I really like Gama hooks. They're really, really sticky, very sharp, micro barb, and a thin diameter wire. We'll talk later in the presentation that smallmouth are really tricky to hook. And so you want to use as sharp a hook as possible. All right, so let's start with getting a thread base on this main hook. And I'm going to go right down the Shanko hook with the thread base. By the way, in the past, I haven't been really super duper careful about thread base. And what I've found is that I've seen issues with the material sliding on the hook when you've got a fish. And that is a great way to lose a nice fish, especially the bigger fish. They tend to put a lot of stress on the fly. So I've become a lot more attentive in putting a thread base in and making sure that the materials won't shift or slide on the shank after losing a number of big fish. So what we're going to do here is we're going to put some beads. Let's see, get it over here. Get it out of the glare. So these are size 6 E beads. In this case, they're red, and I'm real anal about this color. All the specs are in my pattern sheet, and of course I hadn't opened this container, so I gotta take care of that here. about that. They seal these the container really well, so mm, mm. Well, gotta be something, and this is one of those things. Okay, got it. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get 2 of the beads, or 4, 2 of the beads. It's gonna be hard to show you this, but I'll do my best. I've got a length of wire. The specs again are in the tying instructions. This is a braided wire. This is Beadalon 19. Let me show you that. You can get this at any craft store. You can get it on Amazon. And what I've got is, this is 18 thousandths Beadalon 19, and this is in the bright color. And I cut it exactly 55 millimeters long because I know that's the length I need. I threaded that ring eye through it. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to double over that wire. Got it? And I'm going to thread 2 of these 6/0 beads on there. Okay. Hang on, and I'll show you that as soon as I get them on. There's 1. And let me just say, the older you get, the harder it is to see. Okay, so what I want is, I want enough of that to hinge in the back. So I'm going to put this down right like here. And I'm going to begin to bind that down. What I want is, I want enough room so that this thing can pivot freely, but I don't want it really long. And then I want to come back with my thread so that I more or less line up the shank so that everything's straight. You see that? Make sense? And now I'm going to come in and lock that down with some super glue. Okay. Now, by the way, I think that maybe not everybody knows this, but super glue, if it's really sticky, you know, it can be a pain in the butt when you start putting materials down. What we wanted to do is to glue this down. If we want to cure that super glue, you just get your hands wet, and then that'll cure that glue right up. That moisture is what cures the super glue, and then you're ready to go. And so you can leave it wet, that's for sure, or you can cure it. Now I'm going to come in with that same Palmer chenille, medium Palmer chenille pearl, and I'm going to attach that to the rear of the hook, right in front of where the section starts. And now I'm going to start stroking everything back. What I'm going to do is try to get this profile. And I'm going to do, I don't know, maybe 1/3 of the body length. Oh, I was going to do the peacock topping, and I forgot, didn't I? All right. Well, how about a hybrid? I'll show that to you here. So if I would have remembered to put the peacock topping on, I would have put it on right before we put the Palmer chenille on. I'll put it in the front section, and you'll get the idea, and you'll have to use the imagination. But the first thing we want to do is put a little tuft of marabou out the top. And so we're just going to clip off a little bit of white marabou, put it towards the top, almost like a wing. And then now I'm going to come in with some peacock. All right, guys in the Zoom call, it's getting too quiet. How are things on the Facebook feed?
Going well.
Okay, good. Good. I just needed to hear something. Everything okay?
Someone's here watching.
Okay, good. Well, I'm just wondering if I'm talking to the wall. Okay, good. So now, did you see what I did is I came in with some marabou. I made a little bit of a wing that went over that Palmer chenille. And then I just put maybe 5 or 6 peacock swords. And if I would have remembered, that's what I would have done on the tail section. I should have done that. Okay. And now just to finish this fly off, I'm going to come in. We'll tie the peacock chenille or the Palmer chenille down. And I'm going to spiral that forward. Again, training the fibers to the back. I'm also twisting the Palmer chenille as I turn it to try to keep the fibers towards the back. All right. All right, now we're going to come in, tie that off. Making sense? And I'm going to finish off the head. How are we doing? Next, I'm going to come in here and we'll put some UV solar res on the head. Notice I'm holding the Palmer chenille back. I can actually play, because when I cure this, it will define the head shape. So I'm going to hold it back a little bit and get more of a head shape. Okay. So you could fish this fly like this. It is particularly, I just love having eyes on all my streamer flies. But I realized that what I did is I left my eyes downstairs. So guys on the Zoom call, should I go down and run down and get the eyes?
I think so, yeah.
All right. You guys, you can keep everybody entertained. I'll be right back.
That'd be nice in your pond, Bill.
Yeah, I hear you. Did Kirk caught a 5.5-pound bass out of my pond 2 days ago.
All right.
What are you guys talking about?
That little tiny bass you caught.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh. All right. So there's a lot of different options we can put on this fly. Brian likes a smaller eye. I tend to like a bigger eye. So, but we'll go with something kind of in between, kind of in respect for Brian. This is a 6mm Mirage eye, so it's like silver on steroids. It uses I think Mirage is an Orbis product, and these are 3D eyes. And of course, you can play with all different colors. That's the fun of trying your own. But I really like these Mirage eyes. And again, these are 6mm 3D eyes. You can put the eyes on different ways. I found the most robust way is to use this E6000 silicon sealant. This really makes a good seal, and yeah, of course. Oh boy. Of course, I just reach for my pliers, and I don't have my pliers here. Hang on. All right. So what I'm going to do is put a little dab of this E6000 right here, and one over here. Okay.
Is that contact cement?
I'm sorry?
Is that contact cement?
No, it's E6000 silicon sealant.
Oh, silicon, okay.
That's a really good glue. It takes a while to set up, and it does seem to really hold well. What I'm doing is I'm just putting the eye right on top of where the glue drop was. Okay, and then I'm going to come in and seed it.
Yeah, it's a nice base for it.
Yeah. So trying to get that. And I find that is the most robust way. The eyes will come off. And if they do, there's no big deal. Just glue them back on. Seems a little... Yes? So there it is, the Shimmering Minnow.
Wow, yeah,
Okay? So,
nice.
okay.
Are we alone or do we have Facebook?
We have Facebook. There's a number of people on it. I see there's 16 folks on Facebook.
Beauty.
Okay, let me get my cameras reset. Okay, welcome everybody. That was fun. And welcome everybody on Facebook. I'm going to restart the screen share. And you guys that are monitoring Facebook can just make sure this all works the way we want it to. So is that look okay? We should have the PowerPoint and with the little bubble of me on the upper right. We okay?
No bubble.
Yeah, it's up there. You look good.
Okay, great. Good. Well, I want to remind folks, I started, I said this earlier, but not everybody was able to join us at the beginning, is on the Zoom call. So we're broadcasting through Facebook Live. The reason we did that was we were believing that most people can access the Facebook Live and that Zoom is a little more involved. We'll have a question for you at the end of how we do this in the future, because I'm aware that other clubs just do Zoom calls with good success, where others do other things. So I'll have some questions at the end. Just to let you know that Bob Carlson and Bob Schaeffler are on the Zoom call and monitoring Facebook Live. And so if you have questions or comments, please type them in to the Facebook, and Bob will pass them along on the call. I think most of the board of directors is with me on the Zoom call. And you can see that at the end, we're going to use the Zoom call to link in for the rod raffle. As I start out, I like to say, I offer my congratulations to John Lively. I don't know if John's on the Facebook live broadcast, but last Friday, the Friends of the Upper Delaware, along with Eastern Waters Council of FFI, that's the council we are in, had a raffle for this drift boat. And you may have noticed that I was selling tickets on our Facebook page, and John was one of the people who donated to buy the ticket, and John won. So this is his new drift boat, and it's a Hyde 15-foot Montana drifter. And I think he's making arrangements to pick that up shortly. So congratulations to John Lively. And when I told John that he won, he was more interested in winning the rod raffle, but of course that raffle is tonight. And I want to remind you that you can buy tickets up to 7:30, and Vince, I think maybe what you should do is when you're going to close the sale, maybe you interrupt me and we'll announce that the sales are closed. But if you want to buy tickets, go onto our website. Here's the link here, or go onto the website itself and you will see the link to the raffle tickets on, I believe it's on the lower right-hand side. The winner will get to select any single-handed Temple Fork rod of your choice. So you can get whatever you want. If you want to get a tuna rod, you can get a tuna rod. If you want to get a two-weight, that's great. And if you want to get a great rod for smallmouth bass, I would highly recommend the new Axiom 2X. So here we go. Let's get started, and I'm going to share a presentation that I've given in various forms called Fly Fishing for Bass to our club and to Trout Unlimited and FFI clubs around our region. For the fly fishing workshop in Rochester, they asked me if I could break up the presentation into a smallmouth and a largemouth presentation. And frankly, I put a lot of work into it. And then because of the COVID crises, I wasn't able to give this presentation. So it was ready. And when we needed a presentation, I said, hey, I got something that might work. So this is fly fishing for smallmouth. I think most of you know about me. I've been fly fishing now for 50 years. This is my 50th year. I started fly fishing and tying when I was 10 years old from an article in the Boys Life magazine. I'm a life member of TU and FFI, and I've been president of Twin Tiers 5 Rivers since 2008 in November. I'm I also joined the Eastern Waters Council last fall. I'm a retired engineer from Corning. I retired in 2018. So I love fishing for all kinds of fish. I grew up fishing for trout, and it's my first love. I really enjoy the challenge and power of saltwater fishing. I'm completely addicted to steelhead and tributary. But to be honest, the thing that I spend most of my fly fishing effort is fly fishing for bass. And most of that is fishing for smallmouth. The one I want to go through that I think will help you is to start with how the bass orient to the time of year. Talk a little bit about what bass eat, because it's different than trout. Bass orient to the time of year. All right, I'm getting some feedback. Different than trout. Bass orient to the time of year. All right, thank you. I want to talk about what bass eat, how they behave and how they trigger, which is really, really important to how we fish for them. Which is the next part, is how do we take advantage of the way the smallmouth triggers on its prey to our advantage. We're going to talk a little bit about watercraft, a little bit about flies, talk about the essentials of how to go get them with equipment, and that ought to wrap it up. Let's see, let me get started. So I want to say that smallmouth are a native fish to our area. They're aggressive fighters. They fight way harder than a trout is pound for pound. And this is a quote that, if you've been around me, you've heard me say before, is if I'm going looking for a bar fight, I'm taking a smallmouth with me. They are really a tough customer. Hey, I'm going to pause right here. Is there any questions from the Facebook group so far?
We've had one question, and it was related to the fly, whether you ever use a weed guard on that fly you tied.
Oh, great question. So generally for smallmouth, weed guards are not something I use. For largemouth, they would be. So the answer to your question is I've not put a weed guard around this particular fly. It would be possible to do that. And the way I would recommend for this particular fly is to put a mono loop weed guard on here. Hang on a second. Let me switch cameras, and we'll go back to the vise. If we're going to build this with a weed guard, what we want to do is, when we were right before we started this front portion, we would tie in a 20-pound Maxima and tie it back onto the bend of the hook and down along the bend about halfway down. Okay, and then we would UV cure that, and then build the rest of the fly. And then we were done with the fly, when we're done with the head, but before we put the UV on and before we cut the thread, we're gonna bring that up on the opposite side. So we're gonna have a loop. And what we'll do is, and then burn the end of that, get it to length, so it should be just below the point of the hook. And then tie that down, UV cure it. I don't know if that made sense. But this is one change that if you're going to put a weed guard, that's a good one to use in a fly like this. It's also possible to use other styles of weed guards. But honestly, for this particular fly, I've not put a weed guard on it, but I wouldn't hesitate to do it. I do it for a number of flies if you're going to fish them in weedy conditions. Bob, does that answer it?
Yeah, great job.
All right, good. All right, let's get back to the presentation then. Okay. So for smallmouth, it all revolves around the spawn. That is the time of year when the smallmouth spawn is typically when the temperatures of the water reach 62 to 64. That triggers the spawn. So for largemouth, it's a little bit warmer, but smallmouth in that range. So let's talk about kind of the seasons. Pre-spawn is occurring right now. For smallmouth, we're ready to transition because it's been a pretty warm spring and warm winter. We should transition shortly to spawn. But right now, the fish are staging up as the water moves above 55. They're going to be moving into the areas where they spawn, and they often feed aggressively. This is a great time to go after smallmouth, okay? And when they move into spawn, is typically around here mid-May. Midway to early June. I would expect we're going to go into spawn early. In lakes, the fish will move into the shallows and the inlets. That's a really important thing as we live around the Finger Lakes and the Great Lakes. The fish are going to move into those tribs. The river fish are going to move on to gravel bars, banks, and inlets. But it's super important, the river fish are going to move into areas where it's almost zero flow. We're talking back eddies, low flow. They are not going to be in the current where they nest. It's going to be frog water. Now the male builds the nest and it guards the fry until they're ready to be on their own. So if you see a fish on the nest, it's the male. Okay, and the male will guard that nest, and it will not move off that nest, and that's a really. There's some people that'll target the spawning fish. It can be a lot of fun if you do that. The most critical thing is to get that fish landed and let it get released and back on that nest as quickly as possible. I want to just highlight how really good our Great Lake tributary fishing is. And it's just about ready to come onto its own. And the Finger Lakes fishing is not bad either. Now, post-spawn is after they spawn, it's just amazing. The bite can almost disappear. And you can be, for example, on the river and you're just getting fish after fish after fish, and a week later you'd swear there wasn't a fish in the river. And the bite can just almost go away. And what the post-spawn period is known for is being difficult, and you can get fish during that time, but it's known to be really hard. Once we get into the summertime in July, the fish go into a summer routine. As the water temperatures increase, their metabolism increases. When their metabolism increases, they eat more because the food digests faster. And the fish are often aggressive, most aggressive in the summer. where fish are moving into the shallows along the banks to feed. And the topwater bite is just at its best in the summertime. It is a great time to be fishing for smallmouth. Now, in the fall, fishing can be tremendous in our area for smallmouth. And that fall bite, the fish are going into their wintering, getting ready for wintering, so they're going to fatten up, they're going to go into feed. The fish will eventually move into the deeper winter holes, so they're going to move out of the rifts and into really deep holes. The bite, I said here, it can be incredible. I've been on the river in November during deer season on a sunny day, and it's amazing how many fish you catch. Or it can be super tough. But one part about the fall bite is that very few people are on the waters at that time. A lot of people hunting, and you can have the place to yourself. Now in wintertime, the metabolism of these fish really slow down. And that means they feed a lot less frequently. They may feed every week or two. And they tend to be in deeper winter holes where they have plenty of time to look over. So you can fish for them. You got to go with a really slow presentation. For me, that's the time when I'm fishing the tribs or tying flies or going to Florida. And I don't tend to pursue smallmouth in the winter. But I know people do, and I know people catch fish. Let's talk about what smallmouth eat. Now, smallmouth eat all kinds of things. From leeches, I don't know if you can see when I point. Can you see that? So leeches, minnows, cicadas. Yeah, they eat mayflies, terrestrials, beetles, dragonflies, ants. I don't know why ants are such a favored fish food, that they must taste tremendously good. Because if there's ants around, trout, smallmouth, whatever, they will be going after the ants. This is a Dobson fly, crayfish, and yeah, frogs and hoppers. Now, smallmouth tend to key on the foods that they like. And so Dobson, crayfish, ants, and cicadas are favored food. But I will tell you that the biggest fish will key in on the biggest food items. And so what we need to think about is when a smallmouth is actively feeding, it will often eat anything. That is, if there is something hanging around near where it's feeding in that part of the water column, it will eat it. Example is if it's eating these little flying ants, it doesn't matter what you present on the surface, the smallmouth will slam it. And it's often, the bigger it is, the more they'll go after it. So if they're in that part of the water column, it's kind of a neat time. And frankly, my first 100 fish day was with John Lively on the Schmung during an ant swarm. And I literally caught 100 fish on a gurgler. You'll see that fly later. It's a foam fly. It doesn't look anything like an ant, but they would just clobber anything because they were feeding up near the surface. Now, it is true that impressionistic triggers amplify the active smallmouth. What do I mean by that? Well, we already talked about that. Water column, if they're feeding and they see something where they're feeding, they'll eat it. And if it's bigger, that'll trigger them even more. Color, the action, and the sound can be really important in those times when they're actively feeding. if they're in chasing minnows in the shallows. It doesn't matter what is running away. If something runs away, they're going to eat it. Okay? But there are times where the biggest smallmouth, or the smallmouth that are fished for in pressured conditions, where they're fished for a lot, they will tend to need a more realistic fly and a more realistic presentation. So the closer it is to what they're eating, the more likely it is for them to eat it. And this is true for if they're getting fished over a lot. It is true if they're bigger fish. What does that mean? Is if you want to catch big fish, you want to be aware of what they're eating and try to get something that looks like what they're eating and behaves like what they're eating. Let's talk about maybe a couple examples of that. Let's take the example of the cicada. Now, I think folks know that there are these 17-year broods of cicada that emerge periodically in different regions around our country. The brood that's going to emerge this year emerges in Western Virginia. I forget which brood number it is. But our time will be coming. However, there's also annual cicadas that the fish will see. But when there's with a periodic cicada, there's a lot of bugs, big bugs on the water. In a time when you've got cicadas, when the smallmouth are seeing cicadas, they'll often trigger with anything. So a sneaky peek, a foam popper, or a gurgler. These don't look anything like a cicada, but they can be even a little bit bigger and have a more pronounced color, and that can improve their attraction, and is often where most of our smallmouth folks start when there's cicadas on the water. Now, as to get more realistic, one should concentrate your fishing on the edge of the river, because the fish realize that the cicadas are going to drop off of bushes, trees that are overhanging the river, and they'll tend to be there, and they're going to tend to wait for them coming off those trees. So fishing for them when they're looking for them in the heat of the day under overhanging branches can be super deadly. Now, you want your bug to dead drift or maybe twitch slightly, because that's what the realistic the bugs are doing. And you might want to vary your color and the size if you're not picking up fish. But this realistic presentation is the roadmap to bigger fish. Now, I'll just say that there are more realistic cicada imitations, and they will improve your chances in these situations even more. For example, the Chuck Craft cork bug. It mimics the sound that the cicada makes when it drops into the water. Its profile on its belly looks like an upside down cicada, and they can be deadly in these kind of situations. Alternatively, plain chocolate cicada, here shown, is an ultra realistic bug, and it's the sound of this dropping on the water is not too far away from the cork bug, but these are flies that one would go to during these most demanding situations. Often we don't use these kind of flies because they're really a pain in the butt to tie. And the Chuck Craft cork bug, for example, is $15 to buy one. Another example is if we're trying to trigger a fish that are feeding on baitfish. Most of the time, an impressionistic fly works well. An impressionistic fly, like some of these, this is a suspender. This is the Shimmering Minnow that I showed you. This is a Clouser Minnow. This is going to be a jigging type fly. Both of these are going to move in the water, especially when twitched. These tend to sink very slowly and will undulate in the water and be twitched. So in the cases of fishing baitfish, you want to tune your strategy to first where the fish are. If the fish are feeding near the surface, this is the time when we'll be using floating or intermediate flies, intermediate lines with suspending flies in this twitching type presentation. There are times when the fish are staged deeper, and we're going to want to use sinking lines, weighted flies to get all the way to the bottom. If we really need to go along a deep bottom, that's the time when you're going to go with the most sparsely dressed fly with the heaviest weight and the sinking line and twitch that right along the bottom of the river. Now, we want to vary the retrieve. I can't say how super important this is in varying the retrieve, not just from retrieve to retrieve, but during the retrieve. I had the opportunity, I'll show you in a little bit, to fish with Bob Clouser. I don't think Bob Clouser ever made the same movement twice in a row, and he was constantly retrieving based on what he was seeing. So he might deliver his fly, allow it to drop, and then twitch it, let it sink, twitch, twitch, and then he may give a slow pull. What he's trying to do is show a struggling baitfish, not one that swims really great. It's one that's like half dead. And if he were to see a fish flash or feel a fish, or he'll vary his retrieve, and he'll often just stop the retrieve and let the fly drop, and they'll often connect that way. And the color and the size is something to vary, especially if you're not picking up fish. And lastly, let me just say that flies that amplify the triggering, like this Game Changer here, which is an articulated fly. This particular fly has like 6 sections to it and will swim seductively when twitched or dead drifted, like it'll come to life and then look like it's struggling. Let me just emphasize that color is super important. And some good guidance are bright day, bright color, dark day, dark fly. So when it's cloudy and overcast, you want to be fishing your olives, your blacks, your browns. And when it's super sunny, that's when you want to be running your chartreuse and white clousers and your yellow and chartreuse clousers. And in the fall, red and white is always a good color. And I have to quote Lefty Cray, chartreuse is just a great color, and yellow and chartreuse. If it ain't no use, it ain't chartreuse. And that fly right there is actually a fly that Lefty tied, and I now own his estate selling some of his flies, and I own that Lefty's Deceiver. It's just a cool thing. All right, let's talk about cover. Maybe let's just go back. Any questions? We all set
I
on
think
Facebook?
the only question so far, I think, is looking for areas to fish around big flats for bass.
Oh, let me talk to that. I think I might have some more comments on that.
Yep.
But but for smallmouth, the Chemung River is just a really great river. Let me, I'm going to click to my next slide because this is the Chemung River, and this particular deadfall is halfway between the Meniersfield launch and the Fitch's Bridge launch. So if folks have canoes, watercraft, this is a beautiful float. And the river is a great smallmouth fishery. So if you live in Big Flats, the place I would start is go down to the Meniersfield soccer fields. There's a boat launch there. You will see later we have some wet wading opportunities in the summertime. The right downstream of the boat ramp is a really nice riff. Right upstream of it is a really nice pool. So you can explore probably a half-mile up and down the stream just by walking around. That's a great place to start. Two other options is over the dike at Denison Park in Corning. Great evening fishery for those of you who live in the area. Just go park your car in Denison Park, go over the dike at the bridge is at the downstream end of Corning, has just some really spectacular water down there. Very reachable, great way to spend the evening. If you live in Elmira, then going behind the East Elmira Fire Department is a great place to start. Fish's Bridge is a great place to start. I could keep going. Any other questions?
Kirk, let's finish the rod raffle applications in 5 minutes.
Okay, 5 minutes. If you want to buy a rod raffle ticket, you got to do it. Thanks, Vince. All right, let's talk about cover a little bit. For smallmouth, this is the way, I think the most of us understand that bass really stick close to cover. And cover can be a great sign for us as fishermen. And this is my priority, this is my experience, is if there is wood, and by wood I mean any logs in the water, these deadfalls are great examples. I'm telling you there's smallmouth around there, and usually big ones. If there's boulders, big boulders, any bigger than a basketball, but the bigger boulders are always going to hold smallmouth. And for smallmouth, if there's grass beds, you always want to look at the edge of grass beds, and you'll find smallmouth there. Now, important on cover is if you're in my drift boat and I tell you to hit the cover, I mean, I want the fly to hit the cover. I want it closer than 6 inches. From, if I say hit the rock, I'm really asking you to have that fly smack that rock or bump off a log. If the fly lands further than a foot away from that, it may as well have landed on Mars. It's that important. And the fish will often hang really close to that cover. So it's super important to get your fly under the cover as best you can. You will lose flies for sure. But in the case of deadfalls, if you're a dock fisherman, if you live on the lake or fish the lakes, you know that dock fishing underneath docks, is super productive in the springtime. The same is true for overhangs. Now, let's talk a little bit about this. Bass are binge eaters. What do I mean by that? Is they eat like teenagers. Is that they eat huge meals and they gorge themselves until they can't eat anymore. And then they'll go days without eating while their metabolism, it depends on the metabolism. If it's the summertime, it could be several days till they eat again. If it's like now, it might be a week or so. And in the winter months, it might be a couple weeks between feeding frenzies. Point is that we're mainly looking for fish who are on a feeding frenzy when we're bass fishing. Yes, it is possible to coax a fish into triggering if it's full. And I think there's plenty of opportunities or stories where you've caught a fish and it's full already and it's still gorging more. So I'm not saying they won't trigger, but what we need to realize is that the fish that are actively feeding are binge eating and the other ones are sulking. So it's a good strategy to go searching for lit up fish. That is, fish that are on a feeding frenzy. And the fish that are lit up will often move 10 to 20 feet to grab a fly. And I have seen fish, smallmouth, when you cast a fly to the river's edge and it lands, they have moved 20 feet to be there when the fly lands. They can see it going through the air. They will be there. They will have the fly and they'll just crush it. And it's so fun. And for me, that's my primary strategy in the summertime, is to move on looking for these lit up fish. And so I'm always moving. The key is to cover as much water as possible. You might see fish, but if they're not lit up, if they're not ready to feed, you can get them, you can coax them. But I prefer just catching the lit up fish. There's a lot more fun. And so when I'm waiting, I'm moving all the time. I don't fish in one place. And this is the key reason that I mainly fish for smallmouth out of watercraft. Watercraft help to cover lots of water. So your canoes, your pontoons, your kayaks are all good strategies to cover lots of water. Now, I want to just comment a little bit about what a single person boat, like these pontoons or the kayaks, are a lot of fun to fish out of, but they can be really frustrating because what happens is that you get the boat in position to make a cast. You often have to anchor to be able to fish because it's hard to navigate and fish at the same time. A beauty of a two-person craft is like shown here with my canoe. That's me in the front, and my nephew is steering the boat from the back. This is my favorite way to fish with a two-person boat, with a canoe, is the guy in the back. It's a team sport. It's positioning the boat so the guy in the front, the person in the front, has the best shot. This is an incredibly effective way to fish the river with a canoe or a lake. But if you both try to fish, I'm telling you, it's going to be a disaster. It'll be worse than having a single person boat. Now, my absolute best way, the thing that I love to fish the most is this is my drift boat. And the drift boat is a perfect craft to let two folks fish, one from the back and one from the front, while the rower is positioning the boat. I can tell you this is a team sport. The rower is positioning the boat. Often experienced fly fishers know what the structure is the rower is trying to target. But if you're in my boat, I'm going to be telling you what I'm going to be targeting your next, because it's really important that we kind of communicate And if you see a place you want to target, I can position the boat for it. But generally, I'm positioning the boat for targets all the way downstream. I don't know, does anybody recognize the folks in the boat? Anybody in the call? Well, the guy in the front is this guy right here. That's Bob Clauser, and he was fishing off the front of my boat. It's an amazing opportunity. The guy in the back was Brian Shumaker. Brian Shumaker, he originated that fly that I tied earlier. And Brian's a good friend and a really good guy. Other kinds of options that you have is to use a raft. This is one of the newer car-toppable rafts that I bought. It's a 3-person drift boat. This is a perfect boat for smaller streams, such as the Lower Cohocton or the Tioga River for us in this area. Great smallmouth fisheries and perfect for a smaller boat like this or a single-person pontoon. All right. We're going to move to smallmouth characteristics. Well, I don't know that a lot of people know this, but smallmouth there's 2 things that smallmouth can do that I've never seen any other fish do, and you need to be aware of this when you're fishing for them. First of all, they can suck and spit a fly in a split second. I can tell you, I have watched smallmouth grab a fly, spit it, grab a fly, spit it, grab a fly, spit it, before the fly fisher even knew he had a take. This is the reason I use highly colored flies, because I'm sight fishing most of my streamer flies. I'm watching in the water, and when that fly disappears, I'm going to strike. I'm not waiting for the pull. I'm watching to see the fly disappear. And the reason I'm doing that is because they can grab the fly and spit it in like an incredible fast way. I've never seen any other fish that can do this. The other thing that's really important is that their mouth, they will suck and grab a fly, and they can take a crayfish and crush it. But when they grab your fly, they've got it inside their mouth. And if you set the hook, you've got to pull the fly out of their grip. I can't tell you how important that is in setting the hook on a smallmouth. It's really, really, really important that you get a good hook set. So let's talk a little bit more about that. Is to adapt to this behavior, I use super sharp barbless hooks. And I'm using Gamakatsu hooks when I can. If I'm using mustad hooks, I don't use a mustad hooks unless it is sharpened and it can bite into your thumbnail. The important is that your cast lands straight. Why do I say that? Is if there's slack in your cast, if you don't have a straight line between your fly and your rod tip, okay, as soon as that fish hits, you've got a curve. And when you begin to put force, when you set the hook, you've got to take that curve and make it straight. It's really hard to get a hook set on a curved line. I can almost, if you're in the front of my drift boat, I can tell if you're going to land a fish almost from the moment the fish strikes, almost from the moment the cast lands. Because if the cast doesn't land straight, you're going to be in trouble if the fish grabs it. Now, it's super important to keep the rod tip and the fly lined up. Then when you set the hook, you want to strip with your line hand. I'm going to stop the share so maybe I can describe this. Good. So you want a straight line. Let's see, how do we do this? Maybe I should have brought the rod. Can you see? Okay. So I've got the rod pointed at the fish. If the rod is off to the side between a straight line between the fly and the reel, I've got a spring. So when I set the hook, I'm going to induce a spring. I'm going to have a spring. I want to go straight. I want no spring, no rod. And when I set the hook, I'm going to pull back like this. I'm going to keep the rod pointed at the fish, and I'm going to strip like this. The reason I do the strip set, kind of twofold, is one, I can get a real maximum force to pull that fly out of that fish's grip and set it in his mouth. Secondly, is if I were to set like this, okay, the fly would go flying. If the fish didn't have the fly, it's going to fling it somewhere else. If I strip set, if the fish doesn't have the fly, it'll move forward as long as I strip. Make sense? So strip set, super important. If you find that you're hooking any kind of bass, largemouth, smallmouth, and you're not landing the fish, chances are you're not doing these. Now, once you feel the weight of that fish, so when you strip set, the thing that you're trying to sense is the weight of the fish. If you find it, you've stripped and it's a humongous toad, like what happened at Bill's pond the other night, you need to react instantly and you'll need to let that fish run. But you'll know if it's a small fish, and then you can raise the rod tip. Now you've got a spring in place between you and fighting the fish. I hope that all made sense. If we were together, I'd be able to demonstrate that and in different ways to kind of help you to see the importance of this hook set. Again, if you find that you're losing a lot of bass after the hook set, this is the reason. It's somewhere in here. You're not getting a good hook set on that. And these would be my suggestions to help you so that you can more consistently land these fish. I know it was really frustrating when I first started bass fishing, is landing these damn fish. It's true with largemouth as well. Any questions, guys?
Yeah, Kirk?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, if they're fussy and they're sucking and spitting and all that kind of thing, can you start moving that, twitching that fly, making it excite the bass a little more so it's not so fussy?
Oh yeah, so yeah, for example is they'll take and grab a fly and spit it, and they may do that. I've seen them do it 5 to 10 times on a retreat. Okay, and the person's just not hooking up. So if you're noticing that they're not committing to the fly, you can surely change your retrieve. Sometimes it helps to drop the fly, that is, let it just stop the retrieve and let it sink. Where other times it might help to speed it up. And I can tell you, I don't have the answer for how to respond to every fish. I can tell you it's important to do that. and it really sucks when you do the wrong thing.
Thank
But,
you. Oh, thank you.
But if you've ever seen them, there's videos on the internet of smallmouth eating crayfish. They'll often grab them and spit them out. And what they're trying to do is disarm them, that is, take their claws out.
Oh, yeah.
And they try to flip them around so that they can eat them tail first, right? Because they don't go down right if they go the other way. So it's very common for small. They're not playing with their food. That is the way that they're acquiring their food, and it's your fly is imitating crayfish sometimes, and the fact that they do that with your fly is only natural.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Cool. Let's keep moving then. So one of the things about bass, I think we all have seen the bass masters will lip these fish. This is my daughter, who's now a dentist in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Is lipping a bass is the way to manage the bass. And why we do that is, for some reason, when you grab the bass's lip, like Kayla's showing you, it will numb the fish. And once you've got a hold of that fish, it will just kind of go limp. However, I can tell you that this is like dealing with a farmyard dog. Is you have to go in and lip the thing with confidence, go in and grab it firmly, and once you have it, the fish will be numbed. But I can tell you, if they sense you're not confident, they can sense it, and they're going to try to get away when you grab it, and it's going to require you to kind of settle down, just go in there, lock your thumb down, and you'll be fine. Now, one thing I would ask you is to entirely avoid the horizontal lip hold. In any kind of fish, you will see most of the fish that I've shown here, I hold them vertically. The reason I do that is if you hold a fish like is shown here, you can break its jaw. And the last thing we want to do is kill the fish. So please, 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 if you're going to lip the fish, hold your fish horizontally, like Kayla was doing, or like I'm doing here. Okay, hold that fish horizontally. Or vertically. Do not try to hold it horizontally. Don't try to imitate the guys in the Bassmaster class, and don't break the fish's mouth. Let's talk about flights a little bit. In the case of smallmouth, what we're trying to do with fly design is to emphasize triggers. It's somewhat different than what we do with trout flies, where realism is really, really important, but triggers are really, really important in trout fishing. We just need to think about what the triggers are that appeal to smallmouth. Like I talked about before, is location, where in the water column the fish is feeding. What is triggering? The motion that is a trigger. That is, what causes that fish to think it's food. There was a moment that was really important in my maturity on this. You may remember Ray Grander owned a fly shop in Pine Valley. He was one of the founding members of this club. He was the founding member. And he had a pond, and for a while there was smallmouth in there. And he invited me up once. You didn't get very many invitations to Ray's pond. And I went, and there were a number of little smallmouth in amongst a lot of big smallmouth. And what's interesting is those little smallmouth could be just swimming along happy as anything. The moment they were hooked, they were struggling and vulnerable, and the big smallmouth would just take them out. They would take them out. And it's something about the fish's nature is when they see something that's dying or struggling, that's sick, these predators eat it. It's kind of in their God-given genes to do that. So our flies can convey these triggers. The trigger of emotion of a dying fish is really, really important. And then color is as I mentioned before. You want to give these fish something to attack in a fly. And remember that color is important in stained water. You want to have bright flies. In bright days, you want to have bright flies. So let's show you a few of my favorites. My number one is the gurgler. The way this fly is tied, it's a Jack Bartside fly, but Ray Grander adapted it, and I use a design similar based on Ray Grander's, but I use the googly eyes, and you will see, if you know the gurgler and you know Jack Bartside, you can see this fly isn't exactly his, but it's strongly based on him. One way that's super effective to fish the gurgler is what I call smallmouth crack, is with a dry dropper. In my case, I've got a gurgler up here and a chartreuse woolly bugger here. In this dropper will depend on the depth of the water I'm fishing, but in the river, in a deep hole, this could be, I don't know, 3 feet, 4 feet. But if you're having a slow day and nobody's catching fish on my drift boat, I'll switch you over to this rig and we'll catch fish. And we'll get our confidence back, and then we'll go and we'll fish something else. If you're going to wet wade the Shimmering in the summertime, this would be my #1 rig to wet wade with. All right, the Clouser Minnow. Clouser Minnow is the most popular pattern in the world, fished a lot for saltwater. But this Clouser Minnow was developed for smallmouth in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania by Bob Clouser. I fish this fly a lot for smallmouth. My favorite color combination is this one here. The way Clousers are designated on color combination is they say the wing first over the belly. So this is chartreuse over yellow. The chartreuse over yellow color combination, and I use the Fire Tiger holographic crystal flash in here, is absolutely my #1 go-to. I can tell you when Bob fished my boat, he said that for 90% of his smallmouth fishing, this is the color combination he uses. Okay, another really great smallmouth fly is the Foxy Red Minnow. It's also developed by Bob Clouser, and it's a color combination of the Clouser Minnow. In this case, it's made from red fox tail hair, and this looks like a fleeing crayfish. This is a super effective fly. I tie it in a variety of lead head sizes. Sometimes I fish it with bead chain eyes in shallow water. This is a great fly for the river. It's a great fly for small streams like the Genesee, the Cohocton, the Tioga. If you only had one fly to get for smallmouth fishing, and you wanted to really have one that was effective, this is it. And it's easy to fish. The suspender is a clouser pattern, and this fly sinks very, very slowly. So it can suspend along and float along in the currents just slightly underwater, maybe inches. If you're fishing an intermediate line, maybe it goes down further. This has a marabou tail, and the original pattern had wool. This is a reverse tie front. I tie mine with craft fur, which makes it easier to cast. The Shimmering Minnow is one of my favorites, and I already explained that to you. I will fish it in white. I will fish it a lot in yellow. Chartreuse in yellow is a good combination. This is an articulated fly, and it will, when you twitch it, the tail, you can watch the tail snap. And by the way, that's true for almost all these baitfish patterns, clouser minnow included, is you want to retrieve, and at the end of your strip, you want that to speed up by twisting your wrist. It'll flip that and put a little scoot at the end, and it'll cause the tail to snap. And that's really important to learn for smallmouth fishing. These articulated flies is the retrieve that speeds up to a stop. It'll snap the tail, and you can watch it if you're in a drift boat. When you're higher, you can watch that tail snap, and it's super important to the triggering. A fly that takes that to the nth degree is the Game Changer. This is Blaine Chocolate here with Game Changer. Blaine and I think we've known each other for 20 years. I would call us friendly, and I've written a chapter for his upcoming book that has been upcoming for several years, and maybe one day will get published. And this pattern, the Game Changer pattern, uses a series of links that the fly is built on. This fly takes about an hour to tie. And one of these is a $15 fly to buy. So if you stick this fly in a tree, you're getting a ladder. But it's a very effective fly, and it's super important to understand how to snap retrieve these kinds of styles of flies, because you want to twitch them. And you want to come down along cover, you want to come down along a break in structure, and this fly, in combination with a retrieve snap, is amazing. So this is Blaine, and I had a chance to fish with him. I fished with him a couple times. We got to fish on the James River here in this case. And that's a fish that I caught. All right, so I need to mention this. Is super important to get these flies to flick, if you will. And in order to get the maximum motion, you want to use a knot that allows them to hinge. And so for any of these flies, I'm fishing a non-slip loop. For any of the streamer patterns, I'm fishing a non-slip loop, which allows that action. Really, really important. All right. So just to remind you that smallmouth grow really slowly. And so if you are lucky enough to catch an 18-inch fish in the Schmung River, you have just touched a 10-year-old fish. And if you catch one bigger than that, and there are bigger ones than that, they're older still. You might be touching a 15 or a 20-year-old fish. It breaks my heart when I see stringers of these fish leaving the watershed. It will be 15 to 20 years till we get those fish restored. So I'd like to encourage you, especially with smallmouth. The fish in the river don't taste that good anyway. I've had a few that I ate because, you know, we deep hooked them and then they were dead. And I can tell you they don't taste good. So just release them, let them go, and let the greatest gift we can give to another sportsman is to return the fish we catch. Let's talk a little bit about equipment. For smallmouth, 6 to 9 weight rods are what we'll use. I've got a kind of a roundup slide on this, but most of the time I'm using an 8 weight when I'm smallmouth fishing. In smallmouth, it's really helpful to have a variety of lines. Most of the time when we're fishing topwater, that's when your floating line is the one to use. If you're fishing clouser minnows, that's where intermediates are really, really helpful. And why we do that is if we're fishing a sinking fly with a floating line, every time we retrieve that, we're pulling the fly to the surface and letting it sink. If the line is a sinking line, when we retrieve it, we're pulling it level. So it will affect the combination of line and fly is what we're manipulating to define what depth that fly is going to fish. Most of the clouser minnows we're fishing 6 inches to a foot down. But there's times when we want to get all the way to the bottom, and that's where we want to use a full sink, weighted flies to really get down and dirty. The leaders are really simple, and you want a really strong tippet. 8 pounds is about as low as you go, and honestly, a lot of the time I'm up into the 15 range. My recommendation all around, and most of the time when I'm smallmouth fishing around on the river, I've got an 8 weight in my hand, because that allows me to throw almost whatever's in my box. The heavier and the bigger stuff I can throw out with the 8 weight. And most of the time I'm fishing with a Rio outbound short. If you're not familiar with that line, it has a really heavy head where all the weight of the line is concentrated in the last 30 feet. What it means is that I can throw big stuff, heavy stuff out there, and most of the time I'm not false casting to get out 80 feet. 70, 80 feet might require 1 false cast. I can shoot that line because all the weight of that line is out on the outer end. Now, if I'm fishing a smaller stretch of water, let's say I'm fishing the Tioga or the Cohocton, the lower Cohocton, where stealth is way more important. I'm not going to be throwing the big stuff. I'm going to throttle down. I'm going to be throwing a smaller rod and a standard weight forward taper. I'm not going to have a heavy line because I'm trying to minimize the splashdown, and I'm not trying to spook fish. And there's times like in tributary fishing where you really need to go super stealthy, and I'll go down and I'll fish a 5 weight. I'll fish my trout rod. It's fine. You've got to throttle your flies down to whatever that line will fish, or you're going to end up with an earring. But it's stealth. Generally, a smaller fly is what you want anyway. Okay. So if all you have is trout gear, then you're already ready to go. And so for smallmouth and largemouth, trout gear works fine. You're 5 weight, 6 weight. And so this is John Lively. Somebody asked about where you can go in Big Flats. I'm going to blow John's spot here. This is the Meniere's Field launch is just around the corner of this island. And this is a great place to explore. It doesn't look like this anymore. I think that picture is about 10 years old. And all you need is a foxy minnow or an olive woolly bugger. Go out after work in the summertime. You're going to have great fun. Take the kids. You don't need to have all kinds of fancy equipment. You need the must-haves here are a good set of Polaroids. All you need is a foxy minnow, and you ought to wear wading boots, felt-soled wading boots. The Shimon is super slippery. It's unbelievably slippery. So going out in tennis shoes is like going out in ice skate. All right, and one of the my ultimate challenges that is along with the smallmouth is the carp. I love targeting carp, and if you do that, I often in my drift boat I've got 3 rods with me. One's going to be an 8-weight with a floating line. One's going to be an 8-weight with a sinking line. I'm going to have a 6-weight with a floating line for carp. And that's what this rod is. This is my 6-weight. And believe it or not, you want that for the stealth. And a 6-weight can land a fish like this. This is a 15-pound fish. You just have to really bend the rod in the center to fight this fish. All right. So in closing, I'd like to remind you to catch and release, and I'll invite you to ask any question.
So we do have one question all the way from one of our members in Oregon.
Oh, Mark.
I knew you'd guess that. Mark wants to know, how do you determine where in the water column the fish are feeding?
Oh, good question. Good question. So if they're feeding in the surface, that's easy, right? You can see that. So sometimes you can see them feeding, so they'll go in and they'll be chasing minnows. Or you'll notice fish are staged up along structure, but they're a couple feet underwater. So sometimes there's visual cues to tell you, okay? But other times you have to go on experience and time of year. So in the summertime, they'll often feed towards the surface. Here, I'll just stop to share for a moment. In the summertime, they'll often feed towards the surface. And in the evenings, they'll feed in the riffles. How do I know this? It's simply from experience. So other times, they're not feeding where you expect. So the fun in fishing is that sometimes they're not doing what you expect. So that's important. If you're not getting them where you expect, then go looking for them in different areas of the water column. Another example is if you've just had a front come through. A cold front puts smallmouth in a major funk, and they'll often go down to the bottom and sulk. So if you think about, oh, I'm not getting hits, and where could the fish be? What I'll often do is start in a riffle that I know has fish, and I'll really fish it well, moving gradually deeper and deeper and slower until I start catching fish. I was with George Roy one time, and we didn't start finding fish until we were 10 feet or 8 feet deep. It was, and I never expected, it was summertime, and never expected to find them there. So message is, if you don't find them, keep looking and look at different depths. Of course, it's easiest to start shallow, right?
I have another question. For the leader, are you using a taper leader or just straight tip it?
I generally use a leader that's tapered. And the ones that I tie, because we're fishing heavier flies, generally using heavy butts, like a 30-pound butt, it might go down to 25, 20, and then your tippet's 15, for example. But I don't get too weeded up about leaders. And I use like a standard lefty crepe formula, which is I think 50% is the butt, and then it tapers down from there.
That's it for now.
Okay, cool. Anybody else have questions?
Will some of these details be on your recipe or presentation recording?
So the recipe has some suggestions. I've forgotten exactly how detailed they go on how to fish that particular fly. But I don't have anything else documented. There's several good books. And there's a recent book that came out about 2 years ago from a fly shop in, I think it's Wisconsin. That's a particularly good book, and I may have to run down and get the book before it's all over, and since I brought it up. But there's some really good books, Clauser's books for sure.
I just had one more question to come in. Do you want to mention the places to try again, like the firehouse and the dike? I think it was Elmira and
Yeah.
Denison?
Yeah, hang on a second. Let me see if I can, since I'm at home, I might be able to pull up a presentation quickly and show you that. Give me a moment. We'll get there. By the way, this is one of the slides from our academy. And so if you come to our fly fishing school next spring, and you will also find a copy of this presentation on our website. Oh boy, it's taking forever to load. Okay, got it. I'm really taxing my computer power at the moment. My computer's not a new one. Okay, here we go. Oh wait, I have to show the screen first. Apologies. Okay. Here we go. So, can you see where I point? Does that show up?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So let's talk about, well, first we were asked about orient here. This is Big Flats here. Corning is over here. Elmira here. This is the Chemung River right down through here. So some good places to go. Meniere's Field, I mentioned right here. It's a soccer field. The kids play soccer there in the spring and fall. And there's a boat launch right here and a great access here. Fitch's Bridge, also a good access, and there's nice ripply water downstream. But where I want to bring your attention to is the West Elmira Fire Station. If you're heading into Elmira, it's on 352 Water Street, and you will find it on the right-hand side. What you'll do is go behind the fire station and park. There's a municipal parking lot there, and you can go, there's a trail back to the river. We used to do club outings there in the evenings when the club first formed, and it's a really pleasant place to go fishing in Elmira. In Corning, one of the places I had talked about before is at the lower end of Corning. That is the eastern end of Corning. There's a park there called Denison Park. If you're on Route 86, you can see that park, and there's also a sewage treatment plant there. But what you do is you park in the park, and then you head over the dike to the river. There's really good water to the upstream of the bridge and downstream of the bridge. So you can wade access some really, really nice smallmouth water. It's a great place to go in the evening. While we're at it, this is the Cohocton River here, and this is the Tioga River here. There's really good access and good fishing on both. An easy place to get in, especially and take your kids, is the Consilla Park. There's playgrounds in here, so if you have young kids, you can let them play in the playground, and you can go fish. There's good spots right behind the park and downstream. There's an excellent hole just downstream of the launch. Really deep hole. That do it there, Bob?
Yeah, great job.
That helped to see the map?
Oh yeah,
Cool.
good.
All right. Anything else, guys?
Nothing now.
Is there any fish in the Denison Park Pond?
No.
Yeah, there is. Yeah, there's some big carp in there, and it tends to get hit pretty hard with the bait folks. But I've been known to go after those carp in the pond and catch a few fish in there too. And it's a neat place to go if you just have a little time to spend and you don't have a lot of time fishing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let me. Let's see. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Got a question for you.
Shoot.
This is Dick. I fished that Consilla Park. You know, it's close. It's easy for me.
Mm-hmm.
Caught a lot of small fish on the gurgler and a bead dropper with a black bead dropper, and done well. I've taken Dick Paul down there a couple of times and ended up catching fish. But when we got down there to the hole you talked about just below the parking area, which is the old mill run there, and it's a deep hole and it's got a backwash to it. The water goes into the bank, does a sharp right. I've caught a few nice bass out of the front part of that hole, but I cannot catch anything out of the deep end. Now I think it's like I fished the Clouser minnow, let it sink, but I think it just swirls around and comes right back at me.
No, that's
Suggestions?
well, no. Well, I've caught fish in there too, and it's a nasty deep hole. You know, it holds fish, and I don't have any secrets to divulge that would unlock the key to that hole.
Doggone it.
Other than I would say my experience on on holes like that on the river is you've got, it's really helpful to have heavily weighted flies, sinking lines to get down. And my success rate goes up a lot when I get the fly down. Crayfish
Thank you.
pattern's a good place to start.
Thank you.
When it's coming out of there, it probably rises when it speeds up.
Oh yeah. It's real swirly current, and we all know that those areas are really tough.
Yeah,
But there's fish in there.
good.
Well, let's get us back to the presentation. I'm eager to get things over to the rod raffle, and I just want to. I'm gonna change roles. I'm gonna quit being the speaker, and now I'm gonna share some things from my club president's viewpoint, and just remind folks that we've canceled all our activities until May 15th, and we're expecting that is going to continue. And we're awaiting word from New York State on guidelines. We've been working really hard to develop. So what's behind that is we like each other. And we want to fish together for a really long time. So we do not want to call a club gathering if we put any of our members in danger. And we don't want to encourage people to take risks by holding a club event. So we've been working actually for over 2 months to develop virtual capability. I want to remind everyone that the way to get the word out to you is to be on our email list. And secondly, to be on our Facebook group. We're trying to communicate out through both of those. I'm excited to share that International is bringing along virtual content online. I hope you've noticed that. I've been posting it up on Facebook. Let me talk a little bit more is that last fall I took the role as a club liaison for the Eastern Waters Council board. Eastern Waters Council bought a Zoom Pro license. We're using that now. And the idea is that this is a resource that clubs in our region can use and the council itself can use. I volunteered to figure out Zoom and how to use it and be a teacher for other clubs. Now, the board of directors of our club didn't really sign up for this, but they've been very diligent in helping me learn about Zoom. We've used it for a number of board of directors meetings. We've had fly tying socials, and this meeting, of course, is on Zoom. Let's see, a week and a half ago, Joe Cambridge did our very first virtual fly tying class. We invited FFI members, the club members, to join us, and 18 of them did. And if you just happen to have missed that fly tying class, you missed a good one. But I would encourage you that we now have a YouTube channel for the club. Here it is right here. And the video for that master class, along with Joe and Carol's write-up for the fly recipes for the master class that was handed out to the students, actually was given through PDF, is on our YouTube channel. You would also find that Bill Wirtz has put together a video on how-to on a booby fly, and that's posted up. And with any luck, we've taken a recording of this this program meeting, and it'll post up on our new YouTube channel. I want to call your attention to FFI is doing an outreach on online webinars. They started last week with Patrick Berry talking about the organization. Tonight, if you weren't on, or tomorrow night, I guess, you might want to check out Jerry Covielli, and he's going to be talking about panfish soft tackles. Jeff Currier has a webinar this week, as does the head of the Bonefish Trust, which is a partner organization with FFI. Our hope is, as I said, recording of this meeting will be on YouTube. We have invested to learn how to do this so that we can keep some semblance of meeting until we can meet face to face. We're hoping to do more, and the special events are targeted to FFI members, not necessarily to all 350 people on our email list, because we can't really accommodate that big of a group. But we're playing with and hoping to expand our virtual outreach with the potential that the impact to gathering is going to extend longer than we care to. All right. Any questions on that? Vince, buddy, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, give me a moment to switch over to you. I gotta find you. There you are. Okay. You have the floor.
Great. Well, I want to start off by thanking everyone that purchased tickets for the rod raffle. The club really appreciates your support. We get to fund our activities, and we get to promote our great sport of fly fishing. So right now, the tickets are all in this coffee can, but I spent a career as a statistician, and I really understand the value of randomization. So prior to the meeting, I actually took all those tickets and put them in this giant Wegmans bag, and I stirred them up and mixed them up, and I stripped the living daylights out of it to try to get as much randomization as possible for all these tickets, trying to give each ticket an equal opportunity to get drawn. Now, this is for any single-handed TFO rod. So it's going to exclude the switch rods and spay rods. Let's see who the lucky winner is going to be.
All right, drum roll.
We have John Sharkey. So I don't know if you can read this. Can you read that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. John Sharkey is a lucky winner. So Jim will be contacting John to arrange for the rod.
Very
Great.
good. Good work to everybody who worked in that raffle.
Yeah, we had Dick Naylor sold a lot of tickets when we were having meetings, and Jim Wallach organized the brochures and determined which rod we would get, and made arrangements with the International FFI to purchase it through them. And then we had a great success with PayPal. Once we had to go virtual, John Lively was able to write the code that linked our website to the ability to purchase tickets. And that's been a very great part of our fundraiser. So it worked out real well this year. Thanks, everybody.
Great work.
Nice job, Vince. Thank you.
Yeah, good job, Jim and Dick as well.
Thank you.
Well, and congratulations to John Sharkey.
Yes. Oh yeah, John Sharkey. Yeah, we forgot about him.
Well, that's all I have. I gotta look back to my presentation and just make sure I didn't forget anything. What I'd like to ask is, how did this go? So if you're on Facebook, if you could take a moment to respond with your reactions on how our first virtual meeting went. That sure would be helpful for us. I have another question. Is what we did was we thought folks would connect easier with Facebook Live, but it may be better for us in the future to consider just doing a Zoom meeting, and we can always post it out later. So the question is whether you prefer to connect just with Zoom. The question is, could you? Or would you prefer to have the option to connect through Facebook Live? Certainly, if we can do it through Zoom, it makes it a lot easier. But it would be helpful if you could write that in on the comments.
I think
Okay.
it went very well, Kirk. You did a great job there.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
I'll second that. I'll second that, Kirk. Nice job. I always learn something different. And I'll tell you, structure is something. I've learned that, like you say, over years. You learn where these fishing and hunting, I know George Roy and Vince, and I'm a hunter. It's like you got to find the cover, you got to find the food, you got to find the water, you got to find the game, and it's all part of the equation. And I think this is what excites me about this whole thing.
Thanks, Dick. Well, if we have no further questions, I'd like to thank you all. I wish you a good evening. Be safe, fish safe, and keep an eye on emails and Facebook for future plans.
Very good.
Thank you, Kirk.
Good
Thank you,
seeing
everybody.
Yeah,
Good seeing your faces. You haven't changed a bit. You look younger than ever.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, have a nice
All right.
night. Okay, bye-bye.
Good night.
Good night.
Hey.